Richard and I would like to welcome everyone to a very special anniversary live stream for the 79th anniversary of Pearl Harbor. If you'd all just join me for a second, going against all YouTuber laws and physics, for a moment of silence. Today we're going to be talking about the event that took place 79 years ago that brought the United States into World War II. And to fill us in on a little bit of the backstory, I'm going to let Richard take it from here.
Hello, all. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor that happened at what was 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 2:45 in the afternoon in the Eastern time zone, did not happen in a complete vacuum. The Japanese Army had planned, the Japanese Army and Japanese Navy each had plans on how to conduct a war of expansion for the Japanese. They were in a bind because of embargoes and such with the United States, among other countries, and resources were running thin. So the Japanese decided that the only way they were going to get their resources is to expand. The Japanese army put together a plan to expand northward through China, Mongolia, and attack the Eastern Soviet Union. After some problems in China and a skirmish with the Soviets that the Japanese did not fare well in, the Japanese Navy had come up with a plan called Plan South, which was to run through the islands and start around Asia and start taking land south of Japan. They knew, because one of the first places they would end up going is the Philippines, which was an American territory at that time, that they would have to deal with the American Navy. The whole idea was to attack Pearl Harbor, put a crippling blow on their Navy, and Japanese Navy would send out and conquer the islands, and the war would be over. Because Japan knew, the Japanese leaders knew, 6 months was all they were going to be able to survive without, if they had to go full war against the United States Navy, 6 months was about all they could survive. As it turned out, they were fairly accurate. But they attacked Pearl Harbor while trying to negotiate peace in Washington at the same time. As a matter of fact, the attack on Pearl Harbor happened while the ambassador and another emissary were at the State Department talking about peace, but they hadn't been let into the office yet. That delay is what caused problems, because the Americans found out about the attack before they talked to the ambassador to find out that there was war.
The major saving grace, as you may call it, a saving grace, for Pearl Harbor was the fact that the carriers, the prime target of the Japanese Navy, happened not to be in Pearl. If the aircraft carriers had been at Pearl, the outlook for World War II, at least in the beginning, would have been a lot more bleak. But luckily, the carriers were out on exercise. Otherwise, the tragedy known as Pearl Harbor would have been a lot worse. There was also a few other things coming out of Pearl Harbor that we look back on now with a little bit of hindsight 2020. One of those being that for the longest time, there were heroic acts done by U.S. sailors that were not recognized until long after the war. Richard and I covered that when we did the Pearl Harbor attack as a radio show. we didn't cover it a lot, but it was mentioned. There was a submarine spotted and depth charged and sunk the morning of. At the time, the higher ups dismissed the sighting as false, told the captain of the destroyer that he didn't sink a submarine. And it wasn't until many years later that it was finally admitted and the proper honors were given to that ship.
The United States Navy is still recognizing Pearl Harbor and its aftermath. USS Arizona, the ship that is currently at the bottom of Pearl Harbor that was sunk that day, is still, I believe, a commissioned vessel in the United States Navy. There are no other USS Arizonas. The new carrier class, the Gerald R. Ford, the Ford is CVN 79. The USS Enterprise will be CVN 80. And CVN 81 is named in honor of Doris Miller, who won a Navy Cross for his actions during the attack on Pearl Harbor. He was a messman. He's now a culinary specialist, but at the time he was a messman. He manned an anti-aircraft gun during the attack. What makes him special, as sad as it sounds today, Doris Miller was an African American. The only positions they had in the United States Navy at that time were messmen. But he went up, manned a gun, and was recognized with the Navy Cross for his actions. He tended to the wounded. He ended his service as a cook first class, and he was on board the USS West Virginia at the time. So he was the fact that they're naming a U.S. aircraft carrier after the man, even today, for his service at Pearl Harbor, among other things.
Also, I'd like to point out that not only was Pearl Harbor a major turning point in history, which would see the United States enter World War II, but also it was the aftermath of Pearl, not on the war side, but the immense effort, man, women, and supplies that went into the refloating and salvage of the ships in Pearl was enormous. And not only that, but while they're salvaging the ships, which took hundreds of men to do, there's still an active port. It definitely shows the determination of the United States Navy, its men and women, and should be looked upon as a moment of pride that the amount of work in 3 years, because give or take, that's about how long it took, that those men and women did to salvage and refloat many of the ships that were taken out that day. And some of them would even see battle again and get a little bit of revenge, is a testament to human will and determination. And I think it's something that we really need to look at And it's not mentioned a lot when they talk about Pearl Harbor. You hear about Pearl Harbor and you hear about the Japanese attacking, the ships being sunk, and that's about it. That's all you really hear about. You do not hear about the great lengths and work and dedication and planning that went into the salvage of those ships. Because those were major investments in time, money, and also country stature. And in the modern day, I find that something gets damaged, we throw it away. We don't try to repair it anymore. We just throw it away. These people were unwilling to throw it away. If it could be saved, it was. And even if it couldn't be, they tried. And many guns, ammunition from ships that couldn't be saved were put aboard other ships to carry on the fight. And I think if they had given the modern look and just gone, well, those are done, I don't think it would have been the same. I don't think it would have meant as much.
The attack on Pearl Harbor also, the one thing that most people forget is that the attack on Pearl Harbor was not only on the Navy base there. The Army Air Corps did have a base there in Pearl Harbor I think it's called Ford Island. But they attacked the Army facilities. They attacked the Navy facilities. They even attacked the civilian facilities in Honolulu because they needed radio and telephone communications from the island to mainland. They needed to knock these out so that they could keep the America in the dark. They found out that it didn't work. Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor because they thought they could knock the Americans out of the war. What ended up happening, even through all of the loss of life, which we will remember until the end of time, is that it was like a mosquito biting a person. It pissed the Americans off. America actually became a superpower because the Japanese attacked for no reason, or at least what could be seen in the common eye as no reason. The Japanese had their reasons. Even the American government was kind of hoping for something like this. As bad as it is, as bad as that sounds, they were kind of hoping for something like this because America was still in the doldrums of economic slowdown
and isolationism.
Yes, President Roosevelt pushed the envelope of isolationism quite a bit, but it took the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor to wake this country up and to put its best foot forward and show the Japanese and the Germans, because, well, after the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, 3 days later, the Americans were at war with Germany.
And I think that is a good distinction because a lot of people believe that the war in Europe started Pearl Harbor, started as soon as Pearl Harbor happened. But what a lot of people don't understand is that wasn't a guarantee. Even with Pearl Harbor happening, it wasn't a guarantee that the United States would enter the European theater because they really didn't have a reason to, up until a certain leader of Germany decided that he was going to declare war for the first time in his entire history on the United States, which to this day has puzzled historians why he did it, because he never did it before. The United States is the only country that he ever declared war on. He didn't declare war on Russia, didn't declare war on Poland, didn't declare war on France. The only country that certain leader actually declared war was against the United States. Had he not done that, the aftermath of Pearl would have looked a lot different. The United States would have been only focused on Japan, which would have been bad for Japan. However, because of the way that the dominoes fell, the United States coming out of Pearl and its losses in the Southern Pacific, namely the Philippines, it was decided amongst Churchill, Stalin, and Roosevelt that they would adopt a Germany first, Japan second atmosphere. Had the leader of Germany at the time not declared war, that would not have been feasible. The American people would have never allowed it. So in a lot of ways, even to this day, we look back and, well, a certain leader of Germany kind of sealed his own fate, which is kind of sad.
And James Andrew Morrison, we don't want to make it sound like World War II started with Pearl Harbor. It didn't. It started for the Americans at Pearl Harbor. Now, Canada at this point had already been in the war for a year and a half.
Yes, we had.
No, 2 years.
Yeah, well, we were right there with Britain.
Canada declared war on Germany on the 3rd of September of 1939.
Yeah.
2 days after the English and the French.
After the Brute. Yeah.
Okay. The 200-pound bear in the room was the United States. And the United States, even though they supplied, or more to the point, sold, technically, supplies to Canada, England, France, and anybody and everybody else who were belligerents on that side. America was staying out of it. It would be the attack on Pearl Harbor that would bring the United States into the war. It also proved that the United States was every bit as industrially powered as the Soviet Union. Because let's face it, the Soviet Union was the industrial power because Stalin had made it that way. The sleeping giant of the United States, once attacked in Pearl Harbor, showed what they could do to bring these, for lack of better terms, I don't even know what to call it, to bring Japan and Germany, and to a certain extent Italy, because they were in the war Italy was in the war on German side until late 1943, early 1944.
And to further that, as a Canadian, I am well aware that today is the date that the United States entered the war. We had already been there, and I do want to point out that today we're not trying to, who was better, who did it longer, yada, yada, yada. Today is more of remembering those who died today, 79 years ago. Were trapped in their own ship, desperately banging on the hulls. I don't think today is a day where we discuss who was in the war longer. Or who won the war, who didn't win the war. Those conversations are best left for other days. And I speak as a Canadian. I don't think that's the day. Today's the day we have that discussion. There's many thoughts on that. There's go back and forth all day long. We can talk about the Canadian Navy patrolling most of the West Coast, East Coast, sorry. But today is the day that we stop and remember those troops, the sailors that just woke up, weren't expecting anything. And the next thing they knew, they were underwater, fighting for their lives.
Or didn't even have a chance.
Or didn't even have a chance for that either.
It's important. I also want to make a point, okay? World War II wasn't won by Canada or France or England or the United States. They were pieces in a puzzle, along with the Soviet Union, that made those that attacked people for no reason rethink their position. The United States provided a lot of soldiers, a lot of materials, and that's the one thing that I do want to point out here. There were more soldiers sent over, I would think. There were more English soldiers, more British or more French soldiers, more Canadian soldiers in the European theater. But the United States had the ability to provide material that England was going to run short of because of blockades. That, well, France had essentially surrendered, so they didn't have anything. The United States did provide material to the Soviet Union. It wasn't won by one nation or another. It was a combination of all of them.
I like to put it this way. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Sorry, Richard.
What Pearl Harbor did was it forced the United States to say, you know what? We can't sit out of this one anymore. And, well, we're going to screw some things up while we're doing it.
I like to look at it like this. At the end of World War II, the Allies were victorious, and they celebrated their highs. But the Allies also felt their lows together. Because after Pearl Harbor, and a lot of this gets overlooked as well, and I'll point this out for James. In the aftermath of Pearl, it wasn't just American blood that was spilt within the next week and a half by the Japanese. It was British, Canadian, Australian,
Dutch,
and American. Because the British had holdings there in the Southern Pacific.
Singapore is Singapore is a prime example, and the hell that the Singaporeans went through under the Japanese, Burma, Thailand, I believe. But the big one that most people don't realize is that it's at the same time, or roughly the same time, the Japanese are attacking Pearl Harbor. They're attacking Manila in the Philippines.
Yep.
The United States Navy and the United States Army had large bases in the Philippines because it was a United States territory. They were also attacking the Dutch and the French. Well, not so much the French. The French colonies kind of fell in line with the Japanese because they were German allies at that point, technically, on paper. So while everything is going on It wasn't just an attack on Pearl Harbor. It was all through the Pacific. So, um, and you're right, James Andrew Morrison. It galvanized a nation who previously said it's over there, nothing to do with us.
Yeah.
Okay.
As a, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce his name, but as the leader of the Japanese task force said after Pearl, we have awoken the sleeping giant.
The horror stories of the Japanese occupation of Southeast Europe. They're listening to the stories, listening to what happened. There are no words to describe it. Anybody who wasn't Japanese were mistreated. Period. The Japanese, they woke a sleeping giant, and people would like to say that it was nuclear weapons that ended the war. It's not entirely true. The nuclear weapons and the fear of the Soviet Union, that's what ended the war. So, or ended the Japanese end of the war. Japanese, for the first year, with a few exceptions, just kept going. There was no stopping them. And then they figured out that they had made a mistake. We're here to celebrate or to remember those who paid for Japanese mistakes in the very beginning. That's what this day is.
Today is the day where we put aside our national pride, and we salute those who gave their lives. And you got to remember, at this point, those sailors didn't sign up thinking, I'm going to war tomorrow. I mean, there were rumors, but there's always rumors of that. Oh, we're going to go to war. We're going to go to war. But that wasn't what they signed up for. They were willing to lay down their lives if they had to. There was no warning of this. They didn't know previously that, tomorrow is the beginning of the war. They were unsuspecting, surprised, and taken out without prejudice. And some of those men, a lot of people think that it was very sudden. Some of them, it wasn't. Some of them remained desperately tapping on the hulls of those battleships for hours. And that's what we got to take away from this is put aside the pride or the trying to figure out the significance of the day. I think all that needs to be said about the significance of the day is the blood that was spilled, needlessly spilled.
It's also important to remember that even though the attack on Pearl Harbor was 79 years ago today, the speech that is in part in our background here, A Day Which Will Live in Infamy, was actually at about noon on the 8th of December when there was an official declaration of war. A little story about that. There was one person, one representative, who did not vote for the declaration of war. This was in keeping with the fact that she was the only one who didn't sign on to the declaration of war in World War I. She was absolutely against both. She was outnumbered a lot, and it was her right to do that. I'm not going to cast shade on that. But there was one. But it was because she was against war and sending people to die. But the war with Japan started on the 8th of December, 1941. Again, the war with Germany, I believe, was the 10th or the 11th. When the
2 days after Pearl.
When the United States finally declared war on Germany, after Germany already declared war on the United States. The one thing that the declaration of war did, whether we like it or not, was to give the United States the freedom to stop hiding all the supplies that they were providing to the Allies. Because now the United States didn't have to worry about upsetting Germany when they sent supplies to England and to Soviet Union. They didn't have to worry about Japan being upset because they were contributing to the war when they were neutral. The attack on Pearl Harbor kind of changed the dynamic there. And again, yes, they stopped sending bombers over the border to Canada to send to Britain. The United States could just bring them there themselves. And since the Japanese kind of didn't get any of the carriers, the Enterprise, the Yorktown, the Ranger, the Hornet, the Wasp, they ended up paying for that as well.
At Midway.
At Midway. And at Coral Sea. So
it also helped that the United States was able to crack the naval code.
Yes. And it brought on an entire new class of aircraft carrier that would come to haunt the Japanese. The Essex class, I believe it was.
Yeah, it's the Essex.
Keep in mind that at that point in the United States naval history, the Lexington or the Langley was the first United States aircraft carrier, followed by the Lexington and the Saratoga. They weren't built as aircraft carriers. They were afterthoughts. The Ranger, CV-4, and her sisters were the first aircraft carriers purposely built for that in the United States. And it was that class that the Japanese forgot. And that class that started pounding its way back across the Pacific. Which would not have happened had the Japanese gone north instead of south.
The other thing with Pearl Harbor that we sometimes forget is some of the men and women that gave their lives that day were just doing their job. Just clock in, clock out. And I think it's important that on days like this, or Remembrance Day, or other days like this, we remember that this isn't a day for politics. This isn't a day for who's right, who's wrong. It's a day to remember those who didn't live long enough to give their voice on the debate. We're here today to say thank you. Whether you're Canadian, British, German, Japanese, thank you. Because
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Because no matter your nation, no matter your country, no matter your political leanings, I don't think after everything is said and done that there's any room for saying, well, that's not important because it's not my country's soldiers that died. Because quite honestly, any person who puts on a uniform and dies in the defense of their country, whether they're on the right side or wrong side of history, deserves respect. Whether they're on the right side or the wrong side of history. Because it takes a lot to put on that uniform and go die when others won't. And whether we agree with everything that that nation does or everything that that nation has done is rather irrelevant. On days like this, we remember that men and women served the United States Navy. At that time, more men, but we won't go into that. And they gave their lives. They weren't expecting it. Wasn't even something that when they probably signed their sign-up papers that they were thinking that they would ever have to worry about. I mean, have you seen some of the battleships? That was the safest place to be. It's a lot of steel. Pearl Harbor also changed the dynamic. Up until Pearl Harbor, aircraft carriers were not exactly looked upon as anything special. And most navies, I mean, they were second thoughts. The battleship was the beginning and end all of all navies. Well, that's nice. You got 4 carriers. How many battleships do you got? How big are they? Pearl Harbor ended the reign of the battleship.
As a carrier sailor, the dynamic of the attack on Pearl Harbor it was a constant reminder. The attack on Pearl Harbor wasn't only the death knell for the battleship because of the fact that they were sunk at Pearl Harbor and the carriers were the frontline ships at that point. Remember, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor from carriers. The Japanese proved to the United States that carriers were the way to go. They inadvertently, through a surprise attack, taught the United States Navy quite a bit of what they were going to need to know for what was about to come. And what still today is the centerpiece of the United States Navy and other navies around the world.
Yes. So with that, I would like to thank everyone for coming today. And I would like you all to join us tomorrow as we do a little bit more of a lighthearted stream. But it's one thing I'd like you all to take away from this stream today as you're going through your day. And if your day seems a little bad or inconvenienced, just remember that 79 years ago today, men aboard U.S. Navy ships faced a day that makes your day look like a walk in the park. Maybe give them a couple of minutes of thought and thanks. Whether you're in the United States, Canada, Britain, Germany, Japan, doesn't matter. The arguments are over. The war is done. This is not about who was right, who was wrong. This is about the men and women who bravely and unceremoniously gave their lives so that Richard and other people that they would never know, never talk to, never have any contact with, could have a life. A life that's free, and a life that they would aspire to. And they paid for that life in blood. Lots of it. So if you take anything away from today, no matter how bad your day is getting, just remember, 79 years ago, there were people that would give their life savings to be in the position that you're in, no matter how bad it is.
And remember that as those sailors and soldiers, Marines, and airmen were fighting a surprise attack, their families back home, parents, siblings, wives, grandparents. The attack on Pearl Harbor, nobody knew what was going on. Nobody had any real information for days. Keep in mind, keep in your hearts the families that were also affected, whether directly or indirectly. There were a lot of people, a lot of killed and wounded, but it grew exponentially from there to their families as well. Their families were just as in the dark as their service members were.
So with that, I'd like to thank you on behalf of myself and Richard for joining us this morning. And anybody watching the rewatch, thank you. If you liked our content or our presentation, please like, share, and subscribe. And join us tomorrow at 9 a.m. Central for a more lighthearted stream. And I think we're going to end the way we started, in a moment of respect. We're going to let the taps play us out. But I just wanted to thank everybody for coming. Thank you for your participation in the chat. And with that, thank you to all those who have given their lives, whether it be wearing an American flag, Canadian flag, British flag, Japanese flag, German flag. All those who have given their lives so that their children could have better lives. We thank you.